Hey guys, thanks for joining in for another video. This time we're going to build a little tristis enclosure for my juvenile pair from Kurt Lamotte from K&E Family Reptiles. So first things first, let's have a look at the kind of habitat that these guys come from. Here are a few shots from our recent trip out to Uluru and Katajuda and the West Macdonald Ranges. And we did actually find one dead on the road tristis out this way. And we're very unfortunate to not see any live ones. It's a very vast habitat. And there's a lot of rocky outcrops in amongst everything, as well as sand dunes and a lot of acacia. In this enclosure, we're going to base it off this particular site here. We had a group of friends that actually went out to this area and did find one particular individual in this actual ridge that we're looking at. We didn't unfortunately see any, but you can see that the kind of rock texture and everything that's there, it's perfect tristis habitat. It's an absolute awesome area, and I'd love to go back here one day and hopefully find this species in the wild. So to start this build, we're actually going to use a 60 by 60 by 45 centimeter Exoterra enclosure. I'm using some of the Bastion foam boards that I can get from Bunnings. These are just an insulation board or a craft board. I actually like this brand a little bit better than the Knauf ones because it's already rough and textured, and it's actually also easier to carve. So first things first, I'm essentially making up the walls. I've already got out the foam cutter, and this is something that I'm starting to do, is to kind of trim down just the sides of the enclosure a little bit before actually siliconing them into place. And this just allows a little bit better access to actually get the foam cutter in before it's actually put into place permanently. So all the gluing of all the foam and carving of it all actually only took me a few hours. I've kind of come up with a bit of a method that you'll see here later on with using skewers, like food skewers, to actually kind of permanently put some stuff together whilst it's gluing, but also be able to carve it out at the same time. Here I'm starting to glue and cut a few foam pieces together to build out a bit of the bulk rock area. And this is going to be put into the back wall once I've kind of carved these shapes out. So these days I'm starting to toy around with a few ideas of actually carving out some of these foam pieces before putting them into the enclosure permanently. This just allows me to kind of really work over them with the foam cutter rather than having them in the enclosure and not having as easy access to some of the angles. Here's a good example as how easy it can be to carve a big piece of foam when it's not in the enclosure, and you can see how I've used those skewers just to kind of really wedge everything together whilst it's gluing. This made it really easy to kind of get some of these bigger pieces into the enclosure. So going through here, some of these pre-cut, or should I say pre-carved bits of foam are now being glued permanently into place and held in together with a few little offcuts of these skewers. So now comes time for a bit of finer detail. This time around I'm just using the little fine pointed tool to kind of carve out a little bit of the excess background areas where I can add a little bit more depth to the enclosure. This will be particularly useful to these tristis as they love getting nice and tight into these little cracks. Now it's time for the first coat of tile pointing. The first coat in particular is always watered down, just so it acts as a bit of a priming layer to both the foam and further coats of tile pointing. I always do 3 coats of tile pointing, and these days the 2 top coats tend to be almost 100% tile pointing that isn't watered down, depending on the surface area that I'm painting. This ensures for a really tough surface that little claws and crickets can't actually chew through or get into. Last thing I want to do is lose one of my animals into a crack into a background and never see it again. So it's time for coat number 2, and as for the second coat, I'm going to start mixing in a little bit of red brick oxide to it to really give it that West MacDonald Ranges red. You honestly don't need much oxide for this either, but depending on how red you want it, you can just add a bit more oxide. The second coat always goes on much easier than the first. And here comes the third coat for that real extra tough exterior. So now we're going to pick out some of the cracks and details inside this enclosure using a little bit of dark brown and black paint mixed together. So here I'm just going over where I overshot with some of that brown and black paint, using a little bit of the same sandstone and oxide mixture just to kind of take the red back over it and make sure that it just neatens up a little bit. So this is the fun part where it really starts to get creative, when you can start mixing up a few colours and really trying to make this background come to life. Here you can see I'm mixing yellows in with some of the actual red oxide mixture with the sandstone, and this is just going to get placed all over the enclosure, actually using a little sponge that I got just to kind of give some random details and random colours everywhere so it's not all uniform. I'm going to be applying a variety of colours using these sponges and other paint brushes, basically just using things like yellows, oranges, browns, some other reds, and also some little white highlights on these rocks. It's just about picking out the details and finding what actually works for you and what look you're actually trying to achieve. If you notice here, I'm actually going to add some grey highlights, and then once I've added the highlight with the paintbrush, I actually blend it out with the sponge. It might look subtle now, but trust me, it'll make all the difference long term. I'm just using some black vinyl to cover up the ugly sides of the foam that you can actually see through the other side of the enclosure. This applies very easily, just like a window tint, and it's super easy to find. You can get it all over eBay. I actually get it just through the shop, and it's not very expensive either. So as per all my new enclosure builds, you can see here that I've got a little bit of PVC pipe that I've just siliconed to the bottom of the enclosure, and this is just for a drainage hole, so should I need to actually get some of the water out from there, I've got a little access there that I can actually get into. Later on I'll actually put a bit of foam down there so the animals themselves can't get into there, but I can just use a pair of tweezers or something to pull the foam out to start draining the tank. One day when I've got my own place, I hope to never have to have an enclosure this high again, but you know, I'm making do with the space that I've got at the moment. So for lightening up this enclosure with daylight, I'm just going to use a couple of simple LED pucks, and for heat I've just got a 25 watt halogen heat light in there, and later on I'll show you the UVB setup. So although that this is going to be an arid setup, I'm still going to add in a drainage layer. Although I don't think that I'm going to be needing to drain this enclosure out all that often, I'd rather have it in place now just to be sure, and you know, going forward, if I have accidentally flooded the enclosure with a bit too much water, or if I do need to really water in a plant, then I've got the option to drain it out. So plant wise, I am going to give it a grevillea a crack again. I'm yet to really nail down how to keep these things inside of a terrarium, but it's all a bit of a learning curve, and yeah, one day I'll hopefully be able to do it. So the other plant that I'm going to be using in here is this little callistemon, also known as Better John. Another native little shrub. I'm going to see how it goes inside of this terrarium. So here you can see a couple of the soils that I actually used inside of this terrarium. Basically just a plain old garden soil, no fertilizers in this one here. And then there's also an organic potting mix or a compost. I'm not too sure on this one, long term. I'm a little bit worried about the phosphorus content just for some of our native plants. Alright, it's time to whack a bit of fly screen down on top of this drainage layer and get some soil in. So to cap off the soil, I'm going to be using a mix of this brown crushed granite and some red desert sand from work. To really cap this off, I'm also going to add in a bunch of Fish Organics dried gum leaves as well. Absolutely love this stuff. Okay, it's time to light this bad boy up and give these little monitors some real true good UVB. I'm going to be using one of Get Your Pet Right's 12.0 T5 fixtures. Thanks Jerry for the supply of this. This is an awesome little light fixture that's going to go a long way to improving these guys' lives. I'm absolutely loving these T5 lights and I definitely stand by this as a great product. So let's meet the stars of the show. Here's my little Blackhead Monitor pair, or hopeful pair. Aren't these guys stunning? I couldn't wait to get them outside of this silly little tub. I'm not a big fan of these tubs long term. They are a bit of a means to an end and I don't mind raising up juvenile goannas in there, don't get me wrong. I think they're fantastic for that. But long term, these guys really needed to come out of here. Look at these stunning little animals. I couldn't wait to get them into something that looked way more natural for them. It wasn't long after putting them inside of this enclosure that I started playing the Where the Hell's My Tristis game. And this is just pretty common with this species. But when I do see them out and about and running around this rock wall, it makes it all the more worthwhile. It didn't take long for me to start seeing these guys absolutely cooking themselves on the little rock work underneath this 25 watt halogen either. I'm having a blast putting all these Aussie terrariums together and experimenting with a few different Aussie native plants. Grevilleas don't do as well as what I'd really like them to do. I'm kind of struggling to find a type of Grevillea that really does last long term. I find they kind of do okay for about a month or so and then all of a sudden they just start dropping. This little guy here, he's starting to dry up a little bit now. I don't actually think it's because of the heat. I think it's got more to do with the fact that the water can get away from the roots super easy and there were pot plants before that. But, it's all a bit of an experiment at the end of the day. This little guy here, the little Johnny's actually starting to take off and actually shooting up some new shoots and stuff. So it might be a variety of plant that does a little bit better in these sort of environments. In saying that though, the Grevillea is actually trying to shoot up a bunch of flowers at the moment. So it'll be interesting to see what kind of goes on there and I'll give it the benefit of the doubt for a while and we'll see how it goes. So I hope you guys really enjoyed this video and if you did, make sure to subscribe to the channel, make sure you drop me a comment and drop the video a like as well. And I'll catch you all in the next video. Take it easy.